Hey guys, today we wanted to talk about the really horrible, negative biases against censors in the MBTI kind of online community, I guess. Even in real life, when you talk to intuitives in real life, a lot of people have this sort of prejudice against censors and think that there are all these negative qualities that we want to kind of discuss and disseminate and prove that we don't think they are these qualities. And that in fact they can have a lot of qualities that are often exclusively attributed to intuitives. And we want to approach this topic because I think a lot of people are they don't want to type themselves or maybe people that they like as censors because of these negative stereotypes, and ultimately that's just really harmful for those persons' self-development, because I think just knowing your true cognitive functions is the whole utility behind MBTI. So you're just really cheating yourself if you don't want to consider yourself a censor because of these really horrible stereotypes out there. We want to help alleviate this and help start a conversation about about the value of censors, and that we should really appreciate the qualities that they have to offer.
Oh wow, that was such good use of FE.
Okay, I feel like why no one wants to type as a censor is because the vast majority of descriptions out there, and even probably tests, just make censors seem really dumb or just kind of less intelligent than intuitives. And or sensing is kind of this basic level.
Yeah.
And then intuition is this thing on top of that, and everyone's like, ooh, yeah, I'm definitely the thing on top of that. Okay, I just wanted to read this one site where it's ooh, are you a sensor or are you intuitive? And sensing was sensing characteristics, concrete, realistic, lives in the present, aware of surroundings, notices details, practical, goes by senses, factual. And then intuition is future focused, sees possibilities, inventive, imaginative, deep, abstract, idealistic, complicated, theoretical. So are you gonna be looking at that and be oh, do I go by my senses and facts, or am I deep and abstract and imaginative? And of course everyone's gonna be yeah, I'm imaginative, I'm deep, I'm complex. So I think this is really where the whole censor bias comes from. I think we have to be able to admit that yes, censors can be deep, censors are complex people, censors are imaginative, they have imaginations, they can see possibilities, I think we describe censors this whole factual five senses thing. It makes it seem such a sea sponge. I think I kind of said this in my INTJ interaction, but the way they say oh, sensors just use their five senses, it makes it seem like this entity without a brain that is just floating and just feeling the five senses. But it's no, they think thoughts that what's the word, that go beyond the five senses, and they create constructs that are more complex than that. So I think that's a really bad way to describe sensing. Let's talk about SI and SE kind of maybe separately, because that might help break it down a bit. I think SI, the way I conceptualize it as a non-SI user at least, is having these very personalized associations with things that maybe happened in reality, but then you process it internally and kind of create your own meaning to it. So just that process of creating your own individualized meaning to whatever you're experiencing in life, I think that in itself is very original, very inventive. I think every SI user is probably going to have different associations that are personalized to them. I know a lot of times SI is kind of very factual, and I do get that just because they collect all this storage of all of these events and experiences that happen to them that are personalized in some way, and so in that sense they can just maybe have greater memory for facts, but at the same time I still think it's very personalized and individual, and in that I think there can be some kind of creativity and originality, and even some very kind of inventive ways of looking at things, or maybe very even kind of artsy or sentimental ways of looking at things that can come across really well in literature stuff. So for SE, again, I think a lot of people are oh yeah, SE users just use their five senses and that's all they That's all they do. But like, okay, I think SE is probably really good at integrating a lot of information, a lot of contextual information that they're picking up all at once and being able to like integrate it into this whole thing that they can just react on like very immediately. So I think they have a lot of mental agility. I think they're very quick. I think they can see out of the box possibilities that maybe other people can't, because if maybe people are kind of more focused on their internal constructs, then they might create kind of like limitations for themselves that aren't even true, and an SE user might be like, well, no, this is like entirely possible, look, let me do it for you. And in that way they can be kind of like nonconformist as well. So yeah, I just wanted to kind of like associate SI and SE with all these words that maybe we would only reserve for intuitives that I think are just false, and we should begin to view sensors in these sorts of ways.
Yeah, like one thing that I really resent about the whole like SI-SE thing is whenever you think of like a writer or an artist, people think either intuitive or ISFP automatically. It's like, oh, you can only be an artist or a writer if you're an intuitive or an ISFP, and that's like absolute BS. It's like, well, anyone can do anything. This whole thing just goes back to like MBTI and behavioral determinism. So people like kind of conflate the two. So there's so many negative stereotypes about sensors, and like most of them are not even true. Like for example, yeah, so one of the stereotypes that pervades life is that sensing types can't grasp the concept of a concept. I'm just like, no, like that's so ridiculous. Like anyone can understand a concept and like speak in a conceptual level. And yeah, so actually I was totally guilty of this. Like I was thinking, okay, if I'm speaking to a person, I'm not bored out of my mind, then that probably means they're intuitive. Or if they tend to have a lot of ideas, then they're intuitive. So like I was basically like wrong about like two people. So there was this girl who I thought was ENFJ, but she's actually ESFJ, and there's this guy who I thought was ENTJ, but he's ESTJ, and I think really, so basically I didn't really look into their functions that well, like does she really use NI or SI? I didn't even look into that. All I did was like, oh, okay, she's kind of smart and stuff, so she's probably ENFJ and not ESFJ. It's like, yeah, so this is how like bad stereotypes can hurt your own typing of other people, as well as like just hurt yourself. Like if you're a sensing type, but you just hate it so much for like the bad stereotypes, because bad stereotypes you don't want to identify as a sensing type, but you are, then it's not going to help your personal development.
Yeah, absolutely. I did want to mention that like I do run like an MBTI group that I like target more specifically towards intuitives. And I do think that like, yeah, I think it just intuitives maybe can have more ease of conversation with other intuitives, just because our mind kind of processes information in a similar way, and it's probably sensors and can talk to sensors maybe. Although this isn't like a 100% true rule for sure. Like I've had good conversations with sensors. Like I think it's okay if I like maybe have a preference towards talking to other intuitives, but I think there's something wrong if I kind of like hold like an elitist attitude towards that and be like, oh yes, like I am the special type and other people are the special type, and you know, we are like, you know, above sensors in some way. But I think it's just, you know, there's just a difference there. And I think, yes, I think we have to really acknowledge that there are a lot of very intellectual sensors out there. So that seems to be attributed to intuitives, but honestly, sometimes like, sometimes intuitives can, their understanding of something, like myself included in this for sure, can be kind of so far-fetched and like not really connected with reality that I think oftentimes sensors actually have like a much better grasp and probably much more concrete argument for a lot of like more theoretical things than intuitives themselves. Intuitives just might like exploring these ideas for the sake of just exploring it, but I think probably sensors actually might have a lot more intellectual rigor in that sense of just like of being able to, yeah, build a more concrete argument.
But yeah, so I think there are some YouTube channels in which people, you know, think that they're intuitive, but I don't know, I'm pretty sure they're like sensing types, but it doesn't really diminish the quality of their channel. Like, they have a lot of in-depth knowledge, and they're sharing the knowledge in like a very accessible or sometimes like creative way. So it's like, yeah, being a sensing type does not diminish like your value and like the value that you're contributing. Oh, this is like a horrible stereotype that intuitives are smarter than sensing types. Like, that's so ridiculous. So like, for in-depth knowledge, like a lot of times I think sensing types are intuitive types, which is obviously like a bias that I have had, and I'm like getting rid of it now. Yeah, so if we're talking about like MBTI, for example, or like science, or, you know, some very in-depth topic, yeah, sensing types can have so much knowledge, and then they can also create ideas based off of on that topic. First of all, they themselves think they're intuitive, and a lot of other people think they're intuitive, but that's just like because it's so simplistic. You're like, oh, you have a bunch of ideas and you're knowledgeable, you're intuitive, and it's just so unhelpful because you're gonna figure out your cognitive functions wrong, right? Like, if everything else is the same but you think you're sensing instead of intuitive, or vice versa, that means you're gonna get 2 of your cognitive functions wrong, and that's gonna like cause so much trouble in your self-understanding.
Yeah, no, this was, I think, what I wanted to bring up. Yes, that there's this notion that intuitives are idea people, and I think this is like so harmful because like we're all humans, we all have like this kind of, you know, compared to maybe like other animals, like this higher kind of ability to process information, and I think that's what like ideas are, right? It's like just this ability to like to think critically, and like everyone has that ability, because yeah, everyone can have ideas and like original thought, you know what I mean? Like,
it sounds so ridiculous when we say it, but that's the stereotype. Like, people literally like are like, oh my gosh, I have ideas, therefore I must be intuitive. I'm like, but everyone can have ideas. Like, oh,
like obviously everyone deals both in sort of like concepts that are sort of like removed from reality, and maybe information that is more grounded in reality. So perhaps it's just like the order in which you do it that makes you an intuitive or a sensor. And of course, as you age, this can kind of become iffy too, as you kind of develop your lower functions a bit better. But I think maybe an intuitive will probably deal in concepts first, and then maybe with like very minimal sensory information, and then maybe backtrack and kind of as they get older be like, oh, okay, maybe all of these concepts I had were kind of false, and I have to kind of supply it with better, you know, information to actually make a more sound argument. Whereas maybe sensors think first in kind of information that's more attached to reality, and then will build kind of like conceptual constructs on top of like that sort of information. And maybe as they age, maybe then they will kind of strengthen those concepts a bit more, and maybe take a more exploratory approach with it, and take jumps without having that data there first, or something like that.
I think that's somewhat accurate, yeah. I think this is good that I have this ISTJ friend, because he actually knows about MBTI, and so like one of the few like unicorn people who knows about MBTI and knows they themselves are a sensor, because apparently no one wants to be a sensor. But yeah, it's so like so good that he knows that he's a sensing type, and he's like proud of it. So like I think at one point he was saying like, oh, you intuitive types always in like conceptual la la land. Like, so I bring this up because it's not that they can't go into this conceptual level. A lot of the times they don't see the value of it. Okay, it's like a lot of times I can go into detail and talk about all these concrete examples of concepts, but I don't see the value of it. It just kind of like, it bores me. But yeah, for them it's like impractical. It's not that they can't do it, it's just like, if your idea is not founded upon actual things that could work in reality, it's like, what is even the point of talking about this idea? But yeah, so it's more like preference instead of ability, which it's obvious because ability is if you have these functions, and we all like have, you know, we have the pairs, so it's just preference in like the order. So I think in general, sensing types prefer to talk about the idea if they've already worked out its value and application in reality. Whereas like for me, I don't really. It's also like an NFP kind of thing. It's like I don't really care if it's applicable. I'll just talk about it because it's fun.
Yeah, I think it's this association kind of with reality that also maybe people want to say things like, okay, it's more factual or kind of more uninventive, right? But I don't think that's necessarily the case. I think it's just like two different types of like creativity or originality. Like I think you can still be more in touch with reality and have original, inventive ideas, and you can be out of touch with reality and have original, inventive ideas.